brick below, it says dark void.
Fans from around the world have sent letters to his family here.
This one's from Germany. I don't think that's the card. Quite nice card.
While he moved to the other side of the world, this place was in his heart.
The day Ozzy Osbourne was laid to rest began with a strange kind of silence. Not the quiet you get on an empty street, but the heavy, pressing stillness that seems to know something sad is coming. Over Birmingham, the sky wore a dull gray coat, as though it understood the grief about to unfold. This was no ordinary funeral. This was the final chapter for one of the most influential figures in rock history, the man who had given the world Black Sabbath, a voice unlike any other, and an energy that both frightened and comforted his fans. From the early hours, people lined the streets. Some stood alone, others in groups, clutching vinyl records, posters, or photos. Some wept openly, others stared into the distance, their eyes red and tired.
Ozzy, how proud are you of Sharon?
I can't believe it myself. She's just amazing.
For them, this was more than saying goodbye to a musician. It was the farewell to an era, a piece of their own youth being lowered into the ground with him. The hearse moved slowly down Broad Street, passing landmarks tied to his life and music. A few fans sang his songs, their voices shaky but determined, as if keeping the music alive could delay the finality of the moment. Others stood in respectful silence, heads bowed. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, was returning home for the last time, but while the ceremony was about him, something unexpected would soon share the spotlight. Sharon Osbourne arrived early, supported by their children, Kelly and Jack. She wore large,
To be honest with you, the way I felt, death would have been a welcome gift.
dark glasses, hiding the grief in her eyes. Still, her body language said everything. Her hand rarely left the side of the casket, as though afraid that letting go would make the moment too real. Kelly looked drained, beyond tears, her face pale and distant. Jack was unusually serious, his eyes scanning the room occasionally, but mostly, he stayed silent, offering only the occasional nod to those who approached. There was someone else missing.
I thought it was funny when Lola the bulldog puked.
Someone who had been part of their family in a quieter way. Rocky, Ozzy's beloved Pomeranian, had died in 2024. More than just a pet, Rocky had been a source of comfort through years of illness and pain. His loss had left Ozzy noticeably quieter, more withdrawn. Few knew that Ozzy had kept Rocky's ashes in a wooden urn in his music room, a space he rarely let others enter. Once, he told Sharon, "If they ever bury me, put him in there with me." She never forgot. That morning, before the final prayers, she quietly honored his wish.
But right now, right here, today, I'm great.
Slipping a small velvet pouch containing Rocky's ashes into the coffin. But it wasn't Rocky who would steal the moment that day. A few months after Rocky's death, Ozzy and Sharon had adopted a rescue dog, Bugsy. The little mutt had been found burned and injured, but still wagging his tail. An attitude Ozzy immediately admired. "That one gets it," he'd said. "He's got fight in him." From then on, Bugsy followed him everywhere, sitting by him during treatments, curling up at the foot of his bed during difficult nights, and shadowing him from room to room like a tiny bodyguard. Bugsy wasn't supposed to be at the funeral. Sharon had arranged for him to stay at home with Jack's wife, thinking the chaos of the day would be too much for him. But when the family arrived in Birmingham,
Comfortable when you talk about it?
Well, it's not exactly one of my greatest achievements.
there he was, sitting quietly in the back seat of one of the cars. No one could explain how he got there, whether it was confusion, instinct, or something else entirely. Jack simply said it felt wrong to send him away. Inside the church, the air was thick with candle smoke and flowers. Bugsy sat quietly near the front row, his leash in Kelly's hand. But when the casket was opened briefly for family viewing, he pulled free. It happened so naturally that no one moved to stop him. He trotted down the aisle as if he had done it 100 times before. People stepped aside without being asked. The music stopped. The priest looked over but said nothing. Sharon froze, Her lips trembling, Bugsy reached the coffin and, without hesitation, placed his front paws on the polished wood. His nose twitched as he leaned forward, then he rested his head against the spot where Ozzy's chest would have been. The room went completely silent. Kelly gasped. Somewhere in the back, a musician dropped a guitar pick, the tiny sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. For over a minute, Bugsy didn't move. His eyes half closed. He simply lay there, breathing slowly, as though listening for something no one else could hear. Then, something changed. Bugsy's body began to tremble, not in fear, but in a steady, rhythmic way. His ears perked, and his head tilted slightly. The sound he made wasn't a growl, but it wasn't peaceful either. More like a low sigh from deep inside his chest. A faint breeze passed through the church. This was unusual, considering the windows were shut and the doors tightly closed. The candles on the altar flickered once, then went still again. Bugsy lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the empty aisle. Then he gave a single, sharp bark that echoed off the stone walls. People turned to look, following his gaze, but saw nothing. Sharon leaned toward Jack and whispered something to Soft to hear. Jack's face tightened, but he said nothing. After a long pause, Bugsy turned back toward the coffin and rested his head once more. The priest, unsure whether to interrupt, began the service. Kelly spoke first. Her voice shook as she described her father's sense of humor, his love for strange films, his obsession with crime documentaries, and his endless affection for animals. When she mentioned Rocky, her voice broke. When she spoke of Bugsy, she glanced down at the dog still lying on the coffin. Jack spoke next. His tone was steadier, but his fists were clenched. He told stories of Ozzy the performer, but also Ozzy the man, the one who still requested beans on toast every other morning, who kept an old VHS of The Exorcist just because it amused him, and who once bought 4 of the same dog toy so Rocky would never be without it. Then Sharon spoke. Her words were measured, but they carried the heaviest weight of all. He was chaos, she said, and I loved him because of it, not in spite of it. She spoke of the constants in his life, the music, and his animals. When Rocky died, she thought his heart had closed for good, but then came Bugsy, a battered little fighter with more spirit than sense. From that day, she said, looking at the dog, they were bonded. I don't know what he sees now. I don't know what he hears, but if he does, I trust it. When the last song played, Bugsy finally moved. He looked around the church one last time, ears twitching as though catching a sound no human could hear. Then he made another strange noise, part whimper, part sigh. It was a sound that broke something in everyone present. Sharon's shoulders sank, Kelly lowered her head, and even the priest paused mid-blessing. Bugsy stepped down from the coffin and walked back to Sharon's chair. Without a sound, he curled up at her feet, his head resting on her shoe. No one tried to move him. Later, many people would say it felt as though Bugsy had been waiting for a signal, something that told him it was time to let go. Whatever it was, it had come and gone. Outside, the streets were still filled with fans holding signs, shirts, and records. The air was cold, but no one seemed to notice. They were there for one reason, to say goodbye to a man whose music had been the soundtrack to their lives. And though Ozzy Osbourne was gone, the image that stayed with many that day wasn't just the coffin, the music, or the famous faces in the crowd. It was a small dog, standing guard in his own silent way, making sure the man he loved wasn't alone on his final journey. The night after the funeral was heavy in a way Sharon Osbourne couldn't quite explain. Earlier, some mourners had quietly placed candles near the Black Sabbath bench. They stayed there, flickering against the cool Birmingham air, casting long shadows over the damp pavement. No one outside really knew what had happened inside that church, but those who were there, those who saw it, would carry that moment with them forever. Still, there was more to that day than anyone had realized, and Sharon was the first to notice it. The next morning, Sharon woke to a strange, unnatural silence. For years, mornings in their Buckinghamshire home had never been quiet. They always started with something: Ozzy's hoarse cough, the soft patter of Bugsy's paws against the hardwood floor, or the faint whistle of the kettle warming in the kitchen. But now, nothing. She moved slowly down the stairs, feeling the emptiness in every creak beneath her feet. Bugsy was already awake. He sat completely still beside the glass door, ears pricked, eyes locked on something beyond the garden fence. His gaze didn't shift, not even when Sharon stepped closer. She followed his line of sight, but saw only the familiar backyard. This was the same garden where Ozzy had spent most of his final weeks, wrapped in a blanket, sitting in his favorite chair, listening to the wind in the trees. Bugsy kept staring. Unmoving. Sharon shook off the unease and turned toward the counter to make tea. Before she could reach the kettle, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jack. "Mum, you need to see what someone sent me." Sharon immediately called him. Within seconds, he sent the video. It had come from one of the private photographers they'd hired for the funeral. Sharon opened the file without knowing what she was about to watch. It was the moment everyone had been talking about when Bugsy had leapt onto the coffin. She remembered it vividly, but this was a different angle, closer, more intimate. Every detail of Bugsy's face filled the frame: the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way his eyes shimmered with something that looked almost human. Then came the moment she could never forget: Bugsy tilting his head and making that strange, low sound. In her memory, it had been a purely emotional gesture. But the video caught something else, something subtle, almost hidden, behind Bugsy. For just a second, the air near the altar seemed to shimmer. A faint distortion, like heat rising off the pavement in summer. Even though it was nowhere near a candle or light source, Sharon froze the video, rewound, played it again. She zoomed in, but the image began to pixelate. Still, the feeling settled in her chest, cold, uncheckable. Something had been in that room with them. Something they couldn't explain. Sharon didn't tell Jack right away. She needed time to think. That afternoon, she went into Ozzy's old music room, a space the house staff had left untouched. His guitar still hung on the walls. One of his worn hats still rested on the coat rack. And in the corner, a small shrine for Rocky, his old pet. She lowered herself into his chair. Bugsy padded over and curled at her feet. Without thinking, she opened the drawer beside her. On top of a few scattered papers lay a single sheet covered in his messy handwriting. It was a list, instructions on what he wanted if anything ever happened to him. It was simple, thoughtful, completely him. A quiet farewell, a certain song, and something personal placed with him. Sharon's breath caught on one particular line. He'd written it long before he was ever sick, long before Bugsy had even been part of their lives. She looked down at the dog resting by her feet. He lifted his head, blinked slowly, then lowered it again. That evening, Sharon sent a message to Kelly: "Come by tonight. Bring Jack. I found something." When they gathered around Ozzy's chair, she showed them the video. Then the note. Kelly went pale. Jack stayed silent for a long moment. No one claimed to understand what it meant, but no one dismissed it either. Bugsy simply lay there, calm, as though he already knew something they were just now beginning to realize. The next day, Sharon received a call from one of Ozzy's old tour managers from the 90s. He'd been at the funeral, but left early. Now his voice trembled. "I didn't want to say anything during the service," he began, "but I saw something." He described the moment when Bugsy stood on the coffin, how, during the song, he felt something brush past him in the aisle. No one was near me, but the air changed for a second. It felt like he walked past me, not the dog, Ozzy. Before hanging up, he added, he always used to joke that if there was a way to sneak back and watch his own funeral, he'd find it. Said, they'd never see me coming. I'd be there, in the smoke. Later, that night, Sharon stood in the hallway outside the music room. She hesitated at the door. Bugsy was sitting in the middle of the room, staring at the empty chair. And the chair was moving, rocking, slowly. There was no draft, no open window, and Bugsy wasn't moving a muscle. Sharon stayed frozen in the doorway. heart hammering. When she finally stepped inside, the floor creaked, but the chair kept rocking. She reached out and touched the backrest. Instantly, it stopped. Bugsy walked over and nudged her leg. She knelt, wrapping her arms around him, trying to steady her breath. In the days that followed, the house filled with the strange rhythm of life after loss. Friends returned home. Flowers kept arriving. Messages poured in from fans, some sharing memories she'd forgotten, others telling stories she'd never heard before. Jack and Kelly handled most of it, keeping Sharon from being buried under the weight of it all. But through everything, Bugsy never left her side. If she sat at the kitchen table, he curled up beneath it. If she went upstairs, he followed. At night, instead of sleeping in the hallway, he lay right outside her bedroom door. She found comfort in it. In some ways, she expected it. One morning, about a week later, she found Bugsy in the living room, staring at Ozzy's old slippers still sitting by the chair. She'd been meaning to pack things away, to keep them safe somewhere, but seeing Bugsy like that, still focused, almost reverent, she left them exactly where they were. Later that day, Jack came into the kitchen holding a photo album. "Mom, we should do something with all these. There's loads we've never shared." He flipped to a photo of Ozzy in the backyard, holding Bugsy when he was just a pup. Sharon smiled, touching the corner of the page. "Your dad really loved that dog," said. "He kept him sane when things got too loud." Kelly joined them, pointing to another photo, Ozzy and Lemmy laughing during a radio interview. "People should see these," she said. "Not just the stage stuff, the normal stuff." That night, they talked about creating an online space, not a tribute full of grief, but a living archive where fans could share their own moments, photos, voice notes, stories, a record of who he truly was, beyond the music. The idea gave them something to work toward. They reached out to the fan club. A graphic designer offered to help for free. A programmer from Manchester volunteered to build the site himself. Bugsy stayed close during the planning sessions, as if guarding Ozzy's legacy. Sharon joked that he was listening in, making sure they got it right. There were still hard moments. The first time Sharon tried to watch an old interview, she turned it off halfway. But slowly, the weight began to shift, and still, one question lingered in everyone's mind: what did Bugsy see that day in the church? Was it instinct, a memory, or something beyond anything they could explain? If you have your own thoughts about what happened that day, share them in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And click the next video on your screen, you're going to enjoy it.